And we're live. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. So, it's the eve of the EU and local elections in Ireland, and I want to give my final thoughts basically, sort of put them on record because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. It could go either way. It could be interesting. It could be a very interesting few days, and I could be streaming tomorrow night with some God knows what kind of news about how the elections went and maybe the subsequent few days. So I just want to get my thoughts of it in advance down now. I know it's late. What is it? It's near gone 10:30 starting. So usually I'm started like an hour ago, maybe. So it might be too late for a stream in a way, see how it goes. But anyway, I'll do this anyway. I want to get my thoughts down and a couple of new hot takes from myself, from other people on the overall situation as well, not on the nitty gritty of how electoral systems work and that. But hi, hello to chat as well. Thanks for commenting away there. But like, there's a bigger picture on this too. So I was armchair Limerick nationalist, regular sort of supporter on here, usually in the chat, probably asleep now, but he mentioned it last time he super chatted and said, would you go through candidates? And then somebody else on Twitter actually said to me, this is a side point, my first of many side points tonight. Someone on Twitter said, I can't afford to super chat, but would you do something on election candidates and or something like that? I never replied to the guy or whatever, but I wanted to say, oh, there he is. Yeah, armchair Limerick nationalist. What's the crack? But what he said basically the same thing as you did. ALN. I'm going to call you for now. That's not really any Limerick. I'll call you Limerick. But as a side point, he mentioned I can't afford to super chat, and I wanted to kind of say, in terms of and this is both with respect to you there in the chat and your man. I wanted to say, contributions are always welcome on Twitter, super chats. Someone could give me £1 million, or someone could give me a tweet with a suggestion, and it's the same at the end of the day. That's just a side point. Is that the value proposition I bring, I think, to the audience here is that I don't. I encourage people to support the channel and all that, but I'm almost overly tough when people come to me. Sometimes people make a good donation or something and they say, hey, I have a big idea, and I'm like, nah, if it's a good idea, I'll take it as on its own. It doesn't work like that. Or sometimes there are offers of like syndication on different things, and people with offers to like leave this channel and do others. Like, people do come to you with either ideas or propositions, and I'm like, if you're one of those people who's come to me, you'll know that I'm very stubborn on that stuff. So it's not that I don't take suggestions. I take suggestions all the time. But whether with or without donations, I'm always like, it'll be the same, or in any kind of incentive. So I kind of felt, I know your man was being nice on Twitter, but I wanted to kind of correct him and say, well, it doesn't really work like that. You don't need to, I don't know, I'm going off there, but it's one of those things. But the idea first entered the conversation. Armchair Limerick nationalists and a few others mentioned it to me, and I thought, I whatever people suggest, I don't think going through candidates one by one or something. First off, it wouldn't make good content, and secondly, I don't know them all, who they are. I couldn't go through like near on 100 candidates and figure out where they stand and what I think of them. And then the other thing is that if I mention 5-10 candidates, it's sort of like bias. Where do I draw the line? It might be someone who I didn't mention who thinks I should have mentioned them. I don't like pissing people off, but so anyway, it occurred to me that that wouldn't really be the type of stream to do, but I can talk about them overall without really getting into individual candidates. People know I'm a friend of Phil's and Derek and people like that, and lots of the other candidates I'm acquainted with and I like very much. But I don't want to get into like this or that candidate, but there's a lot to be said about the elections in general. So what I want to get into is the overall, the positives of where we're at with this election. Whether someone gets voted in, lots of people get voted in, or nobody does. it's already been a positive moment, and it's sort of ahead of schedule, and so it's a good thing. That's the positive, the optimistic side. And then the negative, spiraling doomish side is to talk about how rigged the system sort of is, which is a cliche around election times. Think of Trump after the elections of 2020, yeah, and the Democrats and Hillary Clinton after 2016 with the Russia interference. And you see this everywhere from America to Pakistan to the Balkans or whatever. This kind of politicization around elections themselves, and there's a cliche of calling them rigged either after them or just in advance, sowing the seeds and that kind of stuff. And that's not necessarily what I'm doing. I'm not trying to kind of spin around like that, but these are legitimate points that I want to make. Basically, the points in which I think the democratic system, while it's a useful vehicle, and I hope people get elected, and it is essential, I'm a big proponent for it. At the same time, there's an element to which, well, this is strong elements, you know probably already, to which you're not dealing with some sort of, you might call me basic for even mentioning this, but I'll go through details. How it's not just some sort of flat space where people bring forth their ideas into the public and they have equal access to, or somewhat reasonable footing, to be able to put forth their ideas and garner a vote and then get into political power and start to make change and all of that. It isn't like that. It's like that for almost anyone, really, except for the so-called far right, where there's this big firewall up in many, many, many systematic ways against candidates. And I want to go through those just to kind of set the scene. And bear in mind, if tomorrow 20 people get elected into EU seats and local seats, not likely. I'll be happy if 1 or 2 do, right? But even if that were to happen, these points would still stand. I wouldn't say, oh, never mind what I said last night. These things are irrelevant, because the fact is, if 20 get elected, this means that it really should be 100, and if 1 gets elected, it should be 10. And you're fighting against this kind of current. So I want to talk about that. There's loads. I mean, I'm not talking about candidates. I'm also probably not talking about how to vote. People debate whether you should vote all the way down or whether you should just vote for who you like. I would lean towards the latter. Just vote for who you like and leave. That's my view. Don't spoil the ballot. Bring your ID just in case. Bring your voting card, your registration card. I don't really even get it. I know those basics. Do those things. I like to think that most people should already know that. And in terms of going through every electoral area and talking about who's a nationalist candidate there, I like to think that if you're watching this, I don't have that big or far-reaching an audience. Chances are, if you're watching this and you live in an area, you should probably know who your local nationalist is if there is one. So again, I'm doing my job, which is generalities, hot takes, looking at the overall situation. That's what I do. So with that said, I suppose I'll just get into it. I'll start with 2 very good hot takes, right? So this is like a collage, right? I'll give my takes here, but I also bring together the likes of, I have very good hot takes here from Thomas O'Reilly, from Mick O'Keefe, and from Owen Linehan, who wrote an article with Grip just lately, and some others. So a lot of the hot takery that I'll be giving to you tonight is just my choice hot takes from other people, bringing it together. And I want to start with, I'll share screen here. Not a lot of video content tonight, mostly just written word. Thomas O'Reilly has some very good he works or writes or whatever it is with European Conservative, formerly Burkean. He is former Burkean. So he listed positives for tomorrow, right? So there's no hiding the 15% block for Irish right. I don't know how he arrived at 15%, but there's a block and there's no hiding it. Positive zeitgeist, yes. Sinn Féin Fianna Fáil nosediving, yes. More capable Gen Z guys going public, and boomers starting to take a back seat. That's a good move in general. Genuine grassroots formed post East Wall. Perfect timing for general elections, which we'll find out when they are soon, I'd say. And anti-fragile alt media helping transition to in real life. IRL. That's an internet slang for real life offline activity. So I think I'm one of those anti-fragile alt media, hopefully. But and he has some downsides as well. They're interesting and all that, but I don't think they're too relevant here. Another hot take, right? And I thought this was brilliant. Was Mick O'Keefe? I don't know if you can see the screen. You probably don't need to. It doesn't really matter. I'll read it to you anyway. This was great. Follow him, Mick O'Keefe, on Twitter if you don't already. He gave a great spiel, sort of heading the bets a little bit, you could say, by trying to rein in anybody who's lost the run of themselves and think this is going to be some sort of electoral revolution or whatever. It's sort of a cautionary message to that, but it's also not bullshit. It's actually true. It's basically saying, trying to sow in optimism but realism at the same time. But it's also, so rhetorically it's effective and all that, but it's also not bullshit. It's true. This is all true. And I totally agree with it all. He said regarding the elections, I'm not just going to read tweets, by the way, for the next while, but I'm just starting on this. He says, I'm glad to see so many people putting themselves forward after years of having no nationalist candidates. However, do not be disappointed or perturbed if nobody gets elected. These are not our elections. Our elections are 5 years from now. So what I'll say to that, I'll just pause and editorialize on that, is that I'm probably on record somewhere on YouTube videos years ago saying this, because I have said this for years myself, which is that I always believed, if you talk to me in like 2019 or some millennial or something like that, you'll probably find me saying this, which I still believe. I said that when the next recession comes, or something of that nature, like a recession, some sort of transformative moment, sort of black swan, like a predictable enough type of black swan, when the cycle comes back around, something akin to 2008. When that happens, the budding nationalist anti-mass immigration movement in Ireland will have sort of found its stride by then, because it's probably a certain number of years away, and it will take the place of the grassroots populist movement that was made up of sort of far leftish, sort of, or led by them anyway, anti-water charges protests of the post-2008 era in Ireland, or like Occupy Wall Street in America and stuff. I believed, I was like, well, it doesn't take a genius to see that that's what's going to happen. It'll be an anti-mass immigration movement, and it'll be led by people, not necessarily me, but all the cast of characters that are known as, or called by the media, the far right and all that in Ireland. They will be the media, the politicians, the familiar faces, the voices who will be leading this populist thing. And so that'll be the moment. That'll be when it goes mainstream, in a sense. And I see people super chatting there. Thank you, by the way. I will read those out at the end. And obviously, anybody else can if they want to as well. Links below. Rumble, subscribe on YouTube. That's easy. If you're watching, you can find my links for Rumble, other ways to support the channel. Follow on my social media in the bio on Twitter and in the description on YouTube if you like to. But so regarding that was my sort of timeline. And lots of people said this, but the timeline is like that. So it's basically a couple of years away. There will be some sort of economic heating up for several years. It will involve plantation, which will be the sort of like the limitless banking, the limitless credit that was dished out like to a ridiculous extent in the 2000s. And they've reined that in, but what they do is replace it with just warm human bodies. That'll be the inflationary sort of heroin of the economic system in place of the unbridled credit. It'll come in the form of biological sort of inflation, in a sense, right? Of assets, of capital. And so that'll happen, that'll ramp up. So that'll like key in with the rising anti-immigration sentiment and distrust of NGOs and all that we're working on as is. That'll all key in together, and this kind of moment will come. And then in conjunction with that, Sinn Féin are ascendant, and there's nothing we can really do about that. We can sort of like try to call out their contradictions, their hypocrisy, and we will, but it's hard to stand in their way. It's so ascendant. They have such a big voice. We're tiny. This was years ago. We're relatively insular. So that'll be kind of hard. But when they do get elected to government, then it'll become obvious to will be ascendant, and at the same time, it'll become obvious to any thinking voter that while everything is still bad, Sinn Féin haven't really changed anything. So now they go into the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael box, and they're useless too. So what's left? And all that's left, you can't go back to Paul Murphy, right? That's been sort of played out. We've heard from him. You can't go back to Sinn Féin. You can't go back to Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. The Greens or the Social Democrats with their like one button down shirt and their rolled up blue shirt sleeves and their cup of coffee or whatever. That's played out. Nobody wants that either. So all that's left is this big boogeyman, far right, anti-immigration, critical of globalization, all that. And so it's a confluence of things coming together, and there is a moment, an inevitability to this moment. And once the moment happens, you move into the mainstream, you capture the hearts and minds of the public, and there's sort of no going back. And from there, who knows, right? And that was always the sort of prophecy, as far as I was concerned. And so I think Mick is kind of getting at the same thing here, is that was really meant to be, if you take those factors together, you would expect that to be sort of more like 5 years down the road. I would have. And then East Wall happened, and it sort of completely mainstreamed the type of stuff that I was talking about in a few years in advance of that. It sort of just mainstreamed all that overnight. It's like everybody knew about NGOs suddenly. Everybody was primed up by the information. There were enough people in little towns here and there, maybe a couple of people in East Wall watching me, watching Phil Dwyer or Gran Torino, reading Grip, you name it, that it kind of keyed in. And so that sort of caught on, because Ireland's a small country. And so you're never too far from someone who knows the crack. You know, if you're in a room with 20 people, chances are there's a couple of your guys in there at least. So that has, at scale, that has an effect. So we saw that sort of come to life with East Wall suddenly, right? It's like a flashover in terms of pyrotechnics. I'm speaking figuratively, right? So how, yeah, you get the idea. So that was the idea. So we're, in a way, the fact that anyone's even talking about, oh, could Derek Bly get into the locals tomorrow, or the Fermoy seat, or this or that or whatever, the fact that we're even talking about that, whether it does or doesn't happen, the fact that it's a serious proposition now, it's sort of ahead of schedule anyway, to be honest. I wouldn't, if you asked me a month before East Wall, which was just, I think, November 22, I would have said, oh, you know, if someone said, oh, do you think we'll be getting candidates into, whether it's a councillor or MEP or anything else, do you think we'll be getting candidates in like 2 years' time? I would have said, that's premature. Like, you know, maybe 5 to 10 years' time, but there's a bit more development to happen and groundwork. So again, the fact that we're sort of looking at this thinking, oh yeah, it's not going to be 0.1% of vote for people like Derek and others. I'll keep naming him, but look, if you know, you name your person, and Phil, Niall Boylan, and take your pick, right? But you know, the fact that like they're not going to be getting 0.01, you know, or a handful of 40 votes, totally insular, totally sort of overly radical, and totally disconnected from any mass conversation. You know, really, that's what it was a few years ago. That's not the case anymore. And we also know that, like, again, I'll keep using Derek as the example, right? Because he's got a lot of people fancy his odds and all that. Say in the locals he doesn't get it, but he missed it by a whisker. Well, the inevitability then is that, well, if he just runs again the next time, it is a dead cert, because of course all the people who would have voted for him tomorrow, let's say, I'm speaking in retrospect and also before the fact, so it's confusing, but it would be obvious that all the people who would vote for him tomorrow, let's say it just about wasn't enough, well, they would all be there the next time for him, plus loads more. And the loads more is guaranteed because events are only, unfortunately, getting worse. And his profile, just the virtue of time moving on, more exposure, means that all these seats would be dead certs the next time. So again, it would, at the very least, it'd be a launching sort of, or like a marker in the sand going forward for generals, for the next locals, etc. So again, I think I've kind of made my point there. The idea that it's just ahead of schedule, as Mick pointed out here. Is this working? Yeah. I think it's a very good point because I hadn't even thought about that. When he said it, I was like, oh, yeah, I actually got so swept up in this in the last year or two. I forgot actually how rapidly things have moved forward, and we are ahead of ourselves a little bit almost. Our events in the world and how successful things have been are a little bit ahead of what we would have expected. So, yeah, so where did I leave off here? He said, we're not supposed to win any seats this time around. These locals, Europeans, and the upcoming general election are supposed to belong to Sinn Féin. We've thrown a spanner in the works, but that may not translate to electoral success. So if Saturday evening comes and counts reveal no nationalists have been elected, it matters not. We continue in the exact same manner as the last few years. We've successfully changed the culture in the country. Varadkar resigned, countless TDs resigning, defeated 2 referendums designed to weaken the constitution. Hate speech bill is dead. Everyone's now talking freely about immigration. That's the other thing too, is like all these different like councillors running on a sort of openly anti-mass immigration platform, and a lot of them sincere. You can just tell. I just know. Like I can't tell you how I know, but I just have a good eye for these things. I'm sure some of you do as well. To me, it's some people are less familiar with it; they don't get it. But to me, it doesn't take long at all for me to listen to someone and listen to just look at them, physiognomy, their language, the way they talk, little quirks of the words, of like choices of words. I can very easily tell when someone's legit or not. And a lot of them they're not radical, they're not hardcore ideologues, but they're sincere people who just they know the crack, and they're running. But they've also got normal appeal. They're just normal people, you know. If you told me 6 years ago, back in the Dunvarna days or somewhere there, that you'd have like, you know, dozens and dozens of people like that running, I would have thought, where are you even going to find these people? Everyone's too terrified to talk about this. Yeah, I mean, you're going to find like 3 or 4 people, and by virtue of it being so scary, you're only going to get very atypical, abnormal people. And I would borderline count myself in that, in a sense. Like you have to have something not necessarily wrong with you, but something a bit different about you in terms of your outlook, your neurological profile, your circumstances, something or a range of things that make you a little bit atypical or different or whatever. And so that was how it was. Whereas now it's those sort of Darwinistic sort of conditions that formed, put it that way, they're not there anymore. You can have people who are fairly normal, fairly plugged into their community. Look at I keep forgetting candidates' names that I want to bring up, and I just blank on them. People who are like, I can't bring it up now. I can't even think of it anyway. But I could describe who he is, and you'd know, but that would be an insult. Anyway. People who are very normal and like work within their communities. They're in the GAR, they're this, that, and the other, you know, and yet they're like coming out on immigration, and what they're saying doesn't sound too far different from what me or Phil or whoever, you know, would say. So positive that way. Like the ground, the fertile ground at this point, that these elections, by even all these candidates running, is a win to begin with. And then if someone gets elected or a handful of people get elected, that is just a bonus to me. The win is already there in my view, just by the groundwork of the whole thing. So what did Mick follow up to say here? He said, over the next 5 years, we will continue to change, and we will have plenty of time to develop and promote candidates. That's true. So develop candidates in a sense of, you know, I saw even some candidates running who had good hearts, you know, and all of that, coming from a good place, who still weren't hip to all the ideas. There's a lot to it, you know. They were just a bit new to it, and I've seen people via the crucible of being online and sort of being corrected on stuff, not necessarily by me, but just sort of by the mass audience online. I don't know. It's hard to describe what I'm trying to say there, but I've seen, and even by running and being exposed, being tarred by the media and the rest of it, and being approached by subversive elements and stuff, they start to work their way through all that. And then they'll just have years to normalize themselves more in their local community, get the idea out and stuff. So it's just brilliant. So yeah, he follows up to say, Ireland is only going one way to the right. The fight is only beginning. That to me, that's like, I'm just reading what he said, but to me, that's the hot take, I think, of these elections, that I second all that in terms of for tomorrow. So that's like my main bit there. Now let's just talk about a bit more though. I have I think I'm getting into it now, am I? Yeah. Yeah, so now I'm just going to get into the overall crack with why I think so. It's like, with that said, now let me talk about how rigged and ridiculous this whole concept of running an election is. I want people to run. We have to run, and getting seats is brilliant. This is not demoralization. Go out and vote tomorrow. Do not get me wrong here. But what I'm saying is that whether successful or unsuccessful, the fact remains going forward that this system is thoroughly rigged, and it's hard to. It deserves legitimacy in the sense that everybody should vote and take whatever scalps you can electorally. It's very helpful to everyone, but we also have to recognize what we're entering into here, what this is, how unfair it is, and that's just important. That's important for lots of reasons. One, because I just want to check, see if there's any issue here. I get paranoid when I start to get texts or DMs or anything like that. Someone's like, "Oh, I don't know." So, what was I going to say? So, it's important. One, just for our own understanding of reality, right? We need to know, and B, it actually helps to promote pushback electorally, which is kind of the irony. By emphasizing how rigged it is, which it is, it sort of should inspire people to get out and vote more. For people in their own local communities to understand that you think you are being told you can go vote for who you want to vote for, and it's some level playing field, and you're going out to put your vote down. But like, before you even, like, even if you did vote for a so-called far right candidate, it's so rigged against you anyway. So you definitely need to do that, at least, that kind of way. I'm talking about the plantation democracy. I did a video on that. They're bringing in hundreds of people. I'll talk about it more here, to vote as a block, and the rest of it. The amount of state money going into it all. You or Joe Normie, Seamus Normie, you have no idea how heavy the deck is stacked against you as someone who might even be thinking about voting to curb immigration or something like that. You have no idea how, like, you're thinking about walking in a certain direction, but you don't know that if you do walk in that direction and you want to vote that way, there's it's actually a big massive wind tunnel with like hurricane force winds coming at you, and so it kind of heightens the importance of fixing it, because this is such a big setup and the consequences are so grave. I think it's important to try to get that across to people. Owen Lenihan in Gripped, I'll just kind of spill the bean. I'm going to talk about this in a sec, but I'll spill a couple of beans. He wrapped it up. It was a very good conclusion, his Gripped article, where he said that not a lot of people even know the extent of it, or even that it is the case. Like, you can go to Seamus Normie on the street, and there's a high likelihood that if you said to him, "Did you know that if Ahmed so-and-so gets off a plane, fake asylum seeker, lands in Ireland, gets put up in a hotel along with 300 of his compatriots, or whatever, hundreds of his compatriots, or Volodymyr or whatever it is from Ukraine, if a bunch of them get brought into some town in the middle of Ireland, and they've been there for 2 weeks, but they just got registered to vote. Like, did you know that they can vote? They can all vote, and not only that, they can run. So they can run a candidate. That's the thing people don't talk about. Everyone's like, "Did you know these people can vote?" Yeah, they can run candidates too, which is like a serious issue too, separate almost. But if you were to say that to a lot of Seamus normies out there, they would go, "I had no idea." And you could say, "Did you watch the last 3 election debates on RT? Did you read 500 Irish Times articles about the elections?" So they'd say, "Yeah, I read them all. Yeah, I bought the newspaper." And you go, and it didn't. None of them mentioned that. No, very salient point. Surely, when we're talking about 50,000 Ukrainians, towns that are minority to their own Ukrainian populations, with a Ukrainian candidate running in that same place, like, that's hardly a minor point. So, did you know that? And they go, "No." So, like, that's kind of a better way of getting to what I'm trying to say, is that it's really important to talk about how rigged it is, because we have no hope if all the normal voters out there who aren't watching me right now don't know that that's the case, because almost to a man they would all say that's fucking bullshit, and you'd go, okay, it is bullshit. Now, one, we could change the law, we could work on politically advocating for changing that rule. That's probably a good idea. But certainly, if in lieu of that, or in the absence of that, the other thing you would do is you would have to vote, you would have to fight fire with fire, wouldn't you? So if the government have that situation in play, and you, even if you're not mad anti-immigration, you agree that that's bullshit, well, then you might be more inspired to vote for Derek Bly or Phil Dwyer or Malachi Steenson or whoever else, I imagine, right? They would go, oh yeah, well, that is a kind of a break glass to pull lever type of situation. Actually, yeah. I mean, if thousands of Ukrainians in a local area can just vote like that, nakedly on national interests, then I suppose the idea that it's a big scary thing to vote for the identitarian candidate in Ireland, that it kind of brings that into focus a little bit. So that's important. And so I'm going to do that. I'll just talk about the various ways it's rigged. A lot of it is, like I say, only in other people and stuff like that, but they've summed it up nicely. No harm in me getting into it. So Mick O'Keefe again here. I should be paying him. I'll get him a, I don't know, steak dinner at some point or whatever. As if I don't know if I'm making quite enough for that, but I'll get him something. We'll go to McDonald's. Me and Mick will go to Mackie D's. No, we'll go to something more Irish. Is there even an Irish Supermax? So my first point is on why this whole thing is so ridiculous, right? The idea that you vote for, like, the marketplace of ideas and how that translates to voting, and then how the voting translates to policy. That surely is how we're raised and taught in our CSP classes, how the basic thing works. And yet, first point, as Mick has got here, 72% of Sinn Féin voters want tougher immigration laws, right? So there was a clip. Oh, it's not. I actually didn't get it. If anyone can put it in the chat, I'll play it. It was a clip of Mary. I forgot it. I forgot to put it in. It was a clip of Mary Lou on a debate on TV3 or one of those things. She was asked point blank by the interviewer, "Is there a fear?" Someone says the audio's out of sync. I know it was the same last time as well. I don't know. Do you know what? My view, to be honest, I know it's kind of subpar and I should fix all this and whatever. I don't quite have the resources, or I'm not very good at this stuff, but I think the reality is the majority of people listen to this anyway, especially after the fact. I don't think anyone's staring at my face necessarily, unless I'm playing a video or something. It's more of a listen job, isn't it? So anyway, look, I'll carry on. But so yeah, there was an interview where the interviewer said, "Are you worried that Sinn Féin is sort of too right for the left, like all the Trinity purple hair people or whatever? It's too right for them, but it's too left for the it's too left for like their base, like, you know, ordinary Irish people, basically, which is a lot of their electorate. And so they're getting stuck in the rabbit in the headlights where they don't know where to go and all of that, which is a subject I could get into maybe another time." And she gave this answer on immigration where she was it was so garbled and made no sense, because she was just saying, it was really pathetic. She said, people should be consulted locally and they should be given the resources appropriate. So the government have made a hames of it, which is classic opposition to say the government have made a hames of it. So then you go, okay, well, are you going to properly criticize Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael? So like, just say that immigration is too much. Say you're not. This, I'll give you my take, right? If I were PRing for Sinn Féin, a devil's advocate here, right? I would say, if I were like coaching Mary Lou, I'd say, here's what you say. You say Sinn Féin are anti-racist. We're against racism. We're against hate. We're against negativity, whatever, right? Give your spiel on that. We're against all that. But at the same time, there is a point at which immigration becomes too much, and a point at which it starts to harm the average person, perhaps even including the immigrants, a lot of the immigrants themselves who've been here for a long time. It starts to harm the average person, and it really just starts to enrich the powerful and the wealthy. It starts to benefit them. And I think that's starting to happen. And so on that basis, we oppose excessive immigration, excessive, all these like caveat words, but say we oppose excessive immigration because it really does just enrich the Johnny Ronans of the world and the rest of it. And clearly, too many people are coming in. So we advocate for it to be reduced, for it to be better regulated and all that kind of stuff. But to boldly say that it should just be reduced, asylum and otherwise, and to try to reduce the housing prices a bit by lowering or stopping the demand growth. And thus, obviously, she could say it a bit more flashy than I'm kind of putting it across now, but and so that's not really a left or a right thing, and shouldn't piss off left or right. That's about the common good. And we at Sinn Féin, while we lean left on a lot of stuff and we promote progress and all this or whatever, we don't consider ourselves staunchly left or staunchly right. We consider ourselves for Ireland and for the common good, but we're not racist. Something like that would be like a zinger, right? Boom, put it across well, work on it, great. And yet, for some reason, Sinn Féin are so ham-fisted and tied up and so captured, I think, that they can't even do that. They can't even give a fake good response, right? They can only give a fake shite response. That's how captured they are, that they can't even fake saying that immigration and asylum should be controlled, regulated, brought down. It really is advancing the interests of the rich. That would be perfect for them, right? And they're so captured that they can't do that. They can't. It's like blasphemy to say, well, because that would go against the multinationals thing, the GDP thing, the fact that immigration can do no wrong, which only a narrow band of people in the country actually buy into, right? And certainly not like a tiny portion of Sinn Féin's voter base, more than anyone. So it's just it's weird. It's weird. I did ask for a link. I don't expect you to like run for me here, but it is a good video. I thought I had it, but I don't. It's really weird to watch because you're kind of just thinking, has someone like, are you like some sort of ventriloquist dummy for like IDA or something, and you just can't, you're like programmed up like a robot, you just cannot say it because it would be so good, not for me, for you, and you can't do it, which is very, I think even someone who's not thinking about it as much, an average viewer, sort of senses that when they listen to how mealy-mouthed it is, to like, it's so off-putting, and it makes you go, oh, Sinn Féin, I was all about them, but God, what is that like? You know, you'd almost prefer just someone like Simon Harris or Roderick O'Gorman, because at least they just push their view, and there's a sort of almost like a frankness to that, you know. They seem like almost the worst of all talking like that. So but that's kind of my point, is about how sort of rigged the idea of like the democratic system is. Sinn Féin became ascendant over a long time, but particularly in the last few years. And the idea that they're beholden to some lefty voter base, and that if they came out and they gave an answer like I described, like a sort of a George Galloway type answer on like, yeah, we're not racist, oh, we're right on, we're cool and all that, but here's like a cool lefty sort of frank answer on immigration that even has the right people on the right saying, even people like me being like, God, that's kind of a good answer, you know. It's kind of a hybrid answer. It's very good, very appealing to almost everyone, likes it, you know. And they could have taken their ascendancy and ran with that and be running with it to this day. And she wouldn't be there like an idiot on TV all the time. Their vote share wouldn't be tanking because they'd be able to answer the so-called far right, and they could go to the so-called far left and say, only the shills for capital of you will criticize this. Only the, they could sort of manage that very well, basically, is what I'm saying. And yet they don't do it because they're captured. Like you saw with Pierce Doherty speaking to Davy stockbrokers, saying he could sort of rein in the far right and capture their energy and tame, I think he said, was the far right. Clearly, at some level, they have been sort of like the ant with the zombie parasite that takes it over and whatever, and it's left hopeless, wandering around. That's kind of like, clearly in some fashion, that's what's happened to Sinn Féin, and it's sort of irreparable, I think. And yet, that's kind of a big criticism of how so-called democracy in the West works. 72% of her voters want tougher immigration laws, and yet they're coming out saying, they're basically not calling for that. They're saying that Simon Harris, Simple Simon, and Leo the Leak and all this made a bags of it. like the most generic form of like the people who are in power messed it up, I'd do better. Sort of like if you said their transport policy is terrible, there's loads of traffic and there's no good routes to get anywhere on public transport. And then you say to them, what would you do better? And they basically advocate like the same policy, but they just say, yeah, oh, it's just the implementation was bad. It's just general ineptitude. Like that's all they have to say. They don't actually have any different, like they didn't even hint at the idea that maybe you shouldn't bring thousands of people into small towns, just full stop. And if that means readjusting your approach in the national sense, so be it. You know, maybe we should look at a bit of Denmark. Like if they said that, like they don't even have to go, let's go full China, let's go, you know, whatever on it. Just let's go with like even a softer version of what Denmark, but just put actual ideas out there properly that people can believe. And they can't do that. So what I'm saying basically is 72% of Sinn Féin want tougher immigration laws, and they're just sitting there going, la la la, like hands and fingers in their ears. Why would they do that? If democracy is about you advocate your ideas to maximize votes in a selfish capacity, but that should meld well with the interests of the public. It's kind of like mutually beneficial. You want their votes, and they want you to do what would get your vote. I think I'm saying that correctly. You know what I mean? There's an interplay there that kind of works for both sides, where basically the cravenness and the whatever of politicians this sort of works, because it's like if they want votes and votes lead to power, and then doing a certain policy means that you'll be voted for by the same people again. That in theory is a good idea, democracy as such. And yet Sinn Féin are just walking away from that. Why? You know, talk about the captured interests and the big money and all that. But that's obviously what's going on to some extent. And it's the same reason for like, you know, why does any party do this? Immigration is unpopular everywhere it is, whether it's India, Ireland, Austria, you name it. It's an inherently unpopular policy among human beings in nation states. People just don't like it for obvious reasons. And yeah, they can't indulge. They can't just say, oh great, oh brilliant, there's this easy voter block we have. Let's just create a hybrid narrative that pleases the people we already have on kind of on the left or center, and answers the likes of me. Because that's what I always thought. Sinn Féin will come up with some bullshit that puts me in my box, where I sort of, they've taken what I'm saying, shorn of any of the pernickety sort of you know, ethno-cultural or so-called racist or whatever it is, you know, race realism, or you know, like tweets that of mine have been taken out of context and demonizing and all that. Like the kind of open, honest, frank person on the right about these thorny issues. They take what someone like, let's say, take me as the example. Someone like me, take all the good aspects of what I'm saying, but with none of the faux pas, and sort of spin it up into this hybrid thing. And then it leaves me, it's like, well, what's the only difference between them and me? It's that I'm talking about some of the edgy, controversial sides of things, which is like, you know, it's like just a purely market idea, like, which is like, yeah, we'll take their idea, strip off the sort of unpleasant bits, and have this exceedingly agreeable proposition framed so perfect. And it's almost like then it would be like, okay, so what's happened basically is I've done all the thinking for them over years, and they've co-opted it very smartly. I feared that they might do that, and I thought, well, it'll be grand because they'll get into government based on that type of thing, and then because they are bought out, ultimately it will have been lies, and thus they'll be proven wrong. So there'll be like a long cycle. And what I didn't count on was them not even bothering with that, basically shooting themselves figuratively in the head, sort of without even trying. I didn't know that they would be that captured, that they would, because I thought, well, they surely want all the votes, right? They want the power and some just to make money or something, right? But no, the clearly runs deeper in the democratic system, stuff we don't know about, stuff that I don't know about, and or we hear hints of, like with this Davy stockbrokers thing. There are deeper things at play here, like we saw with the Fine Gael young fellas canvassing somewhere, and they were lambasted by the guy at the door for immigration, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're against the two but higher ups, you know, it's nothing we can do." And the same with the councillors in Galway, Noel Thomas and Micheál Martin. I spoke about this recently, don't want to repeat myself, but it's kind of like, Well, if it's unpopular and it makes it hard for politicians, so if a lot of the Fianna Fáil people go to, let's say, Micheál Martin and say, listen, I'm just an ordinary local Gambino, but what I'm saying is bringing these people in kills us electorally. And so I'm not an ideological Irish nationalist, patriot or anything, but I'm just a purely cynical person who's looking at my votes pissing down the drain here. And so we are a party. I'm going to bring it to you. And so are dozens of other councillors and TDs and stuff, and say, could we just kind of stop it a little bit, or at least half stop it and act like we're stopping it or something like that, just purely for on the ground reasons. And so why would Micheál Martin go back to them and say, no, we're only going to escalate further, make it worse for you? And Fianna Fáil are tanking, as are Sinn Féin. They've hit this kind of ceiling and they're doomed basically now. Why would a self-interested entity in a democratic forum do that to itself? That's sort of my point one. I don't want to belabor it. That's one indicator of why it's just crazy and nonsense. Here's another one of why it's kind of rigged. So I do have like 40 tabs open. That's going to be an issue. Yeah. I wonder. There's something slowing it down tonight. I might have some program on in the background or something like that. I don't know. Just bear with me. You know how it is here, yeah? But yeah, so this is the first time I'm going to go only in here tonight. He said, so there was an article here by the Irish Examiner. I am making a point here. It's a headline from the Irish Examiner said, elections will test how much Ireland has been fooled by the far right. And as Owen said here, he said, imagine an article in any national newspaper with the title, elections will test how much Ireland continues to be fooled by the government or fooled by the status quo. They would never say that because the status quo is what it is. The media are, I'm not saying anything new here. The media are a tool of the establishment, obviously, right? Like this is like baby step stuff. But yeah, he says it would never happen because they're a propaganda wing of the government. We know that, right? But it's sort of, as much as we have power on social media, the Armchair Limerick National has given me tech support here. Try separating the tab that you want. I'll think about it for next time, but I'll go overload with I'll start like stumbling on what I'm trying to say if I start trying to do stuff here. So I suppose I'll just try and roll with it here, but thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I've also had it said to me that I should just put all the tabs into like a bookmark folder and then open them one by one. I'm very stubborn. I'm very reluctant to change even the smallest things. You know, I'm a horrible person in that sense. Not horrible, but like it's a horribly stubborn and sort of backward attitude I have. But it would make for a better show, obviously, when things like this happen. I'll consider doing that. It's just I like basically the reason I'm stubborn is because I like it the way it is, and what I want is if the internet and the computer worked well for this is how I like it, and it's almost a stubbornness of like, well, I'd like it to work, so I'll just keep going because that's the way I like. You know what I mean? Anyway, so I'll try to fix it up next time maybe with those ideas. But and this could get ugly here because I'm trying to go through lots of tabs. Oh, this is going to get bad. This is totally not. So basically what I did was I Googled far right elections Ireland to just see some of the recent articles, and it's just headline after headline. Yeah, I know I'm roboting, am I? Did someone just blue sky saying Asperger's? Are you saying I'm Asperg? Or is someone else Asperg? I've never considered it. Maybe I'm Asperg. Oh yeah, for like being stubborn about the tabs. Yeah, maybe I don't know. Who knows? I'll try and Google it later and see if I'm Asperg. But it's a bunch of articles basically, and one after another. You kind of go, yeah, the media is a dinosaur legacy media. No one cares about it anymore. The rest, at the same time, at the same time, it does have some impact. There are people watching it and have this thing. Nothing is worth. Everything's freezing on my screen. He says, diagnose me. Sit down on the therapist chair here and we'll start diagnosing everyone one by one. What you have, what you got. Yeah, so it's a lot of buffering. Is my sound buffering? Am I robot? That's what's important. If my sound is coming across straightforwardly, then I kind of I can get over it. Blue Sky says he's kidding. What's he kidding about? Sorry, I'm who's who? But I thought I'm a Spurgeon. Yeah, I'm just, let's see there if just is my sound. Just let me know basically how bad it is. I need a Linux laptop. Cool. I'm roboting. Okay, thanks, Limerick. I'll just get rid of the. I think I'll just get rid of tabs. It's bad though because what will I do? What will I do? I've content here I want to read, but I could just pick out the most relevant one. I could just do that. Close everything. Pull up the real one is Owen Lenihan on Gript. I just want to read that article. And if everything else had to go, that'd be grand. Oh, now I'm hearing sound is okay. Yeah, bulk bookmark first. Yeah, okay, I will have to start doing that. The problem, see, the reason I don't do it, I haven't done it thus far, is because things like this will happen. I am on a Chromebook. Someone asks, yeah, I am. The reason I don't do some of the CPU needs a pint. I think I do as well, but one of the reasons I haven't addressed it is because I'll go live a lot of nights, and actually, for the most part, it sort of works, and so that makes me complacent. Where I go, actually, it's fine, yeah. And then once in a while, it'll do this. So, but I can even I can scroll the top here, and it gives me like a little thumbnail. I'll read them out to you. Okay, so here's a couple of these headlines. I just want to give you an idea. So, bear in mind that far right is a scare. It's not a. James Antaward gives €6. Thanks very much, and said it's not that bad. Okay, cool. So I can actually read a little thumbnail. All I need to do is read them from. You don't even need to see them. But just bear in mind, far right is a loaded up scare word, right? It's not like some innocent description of a political spectrum or something like that. It isn't. It's a scare word. It means like it's almost like connotes terrorist or something like that. Some sort of horrible hate monster terrorist, right? And the chat's making me laugh here, lads. So someone says, "What the fuck is Redbeard at?" That's good. And then someone else says, "Put the batteries in the radiator fireplace, or put the batteries on the radiator fireplace." Oh, that's funny. But so I'll read some of these headlines. These are just like the last couple of weeks. Don't vote for far right candidates in upcoming elections, Integration Minister says. Now, you're allowed to be political even if you're in office and condemn your opponents and all that, but he's not talking about a specific party. He's just talking about like a side of the spectrum. I don't know, but there's more. The Irish Times view on the European Parliament elections: a threat from the far right. So the paper of record in Ireland, so called, are saying, yeah, a threat from the far right. Like, why don't they say a threat from anything else? A threat from the IDA, a threat from the far left, a threat from the business. They don't talk about anything like this, and that does have an effect to getting into the average person's head. Obviously, if they're reading average, there's the Irish Examiner view. So this is like their overall view. They say Irish Examiner view: Europe isn't falling for the far right. So falling for it obviously implies that it's not just that Europe isn't falling for it and that they're far right, like, which is evil, but that it's a trick. So not only is it evil, but it's a trick. It's tricking you. You wouldn't want to be tricked. You're smart, obviously, and you're not going to be tricked by this far right. So it's like saying multiple things at the same time there, but just like designed to be as put offy and voter suppression-y as possible, in a sense. Here's a separate one again. The Irish Times view on European elections: containing the far right surge. So again, containing, it needs to be contained. This is again from the Examiner. As the drumbeat of hate grows, how serious is the far right threat to the state? Come on, right? Uh, um, next one, Irish Examiner. Far-right conspiracy theorists are having a hugely destructive effect on our, see, it's tiny here. I'm trying to read it. Our political system. Yeah. Far-right conspiracy theorists are having a hugely destructive effect on our political system. They're just running in the elections like everybody else. They want to stop immigration in alignment with the wishes of the majority of the population, the majority of basically all mainstream parties' own voters, especially Sinn Féin. And yet they're calling this having a destructive effect on our political system. What? They're legitimate candidates running in the election. What are you talking about? Will far-right politicians make inroads in local and European elections? Now, on the face of it, that might seem a bit more innocent. Like, oh, will they make inroads? Fair enough. But it's like, well, you're saying you're using far-right again. You could just say, will immigration skeptic, like anti-mass immigration candidates, that would be the most value-neutral sort of term. It'd be pretty reasonable. Well, and of course, a lot of people would read it and go, oh, will they make inroads? Gosh, I hope they do. Who are they? Let me vote for them, right? But when it's a far right threat, far right, they're trying to trick you, that's obviously designed to do that. Oh shit, I just tried to click on something. That's going to like cause the computer to spaz out. What's the next one? 3 new anti-immigrant parties have registered to stand in Irish elections. Again, loaded up term. I don't know about any of you, but I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm anti-mass immigration. I'm anti really any immigration at this point. I want like mass deportations and all the rest of it. I'm not weak on this stuff. But even for me to say, if someone described me as anti-immigrant, I'd just be like, well, no. Just as a matter of fact, that's not true. You're saying that I'm like, that's even for the most radical kind of person. It's like, well, who could be anti-immigrant? Come on, you're talking about anti any single immigrant ever person at all. You're not just like, it's not a conceptual thing or about mass numbers, about policy, about big numbers of things, right? In a society, it's not about a societal thing. It's about like right down to the last immigrant in it, under any circumstance. Nobody. That's obviously anyone who reads that thinks, oh, that's negative, that's bad. So it's they basically beat people over the head, and then it's the subtle little snaky things as well, but always like that. What's the next one? It's taking a second to kind of. I'm getting people. Someone's saying shut it down fully. He's talking about the stream, or not the stream, but the tabs. So I'm getting mixed messages. People say it's grand, and then I get tripped up when people, say it's bad. I'm not sure, but and here was the clincher. This was the best one of all. It was this was from the Independent. So it was this is where the guards, their security sources who speak to journalists, they collaborate with the media to create propaganda, right? So the guard tell some journalists some bullshit, and it's all like they tell them, they basically cook up the headline together. I'll tell you some bullshit that doesn't have to be verified as true at all. I'll just tell you, and I am a source now, anonymous, and so both the guards and the media who are on the same team cook up basically propaganda. So Gardaí monitor threat of far-right unrest ahead of European and local elections. So that's meant to stir up the idea of like terrorism, basically, like unrest, Gardaí monitoring, threat, unrest, stuff like that. Like the words there in one short headline, they have monitoring, threat, unrest, far right, and Gardaí. I mean, that just cooks up terrorism, like bad, stuff. And then of course it connects it to elections, terrorists, these candidates. Clearly that suppresses, that demoralizes any voter who might consider voting for someone who's so-called far right. That's active voter suppression, basically, right? And was there any more? There was another one, similar kind of stuff, but it's like, you can sort of like, one of these things will go up on Twitter and there'll be 300 replies. It'll get totally ratioed. People being like, this is nonsense. More of the MSM again. Yeah, each individual thing is just fodder for annoyance, sure. But taken as a whole, you're kind of like going, this kind of does undermine the basic concept of fair democracy. Like they don't like tar and feather up, like a variety of people they don't like. They don't go after all their sort of opponents, people they don't like. Like, it's exclusively for anyone who's against this plantation immigration. gets called far right, gets called implied that they're terroristic, and the rest. It's like that is a form of rigging. Like it's not just like there's the odd article where it's a bit of a smear. So be it. We all know they have a bias. That'd be one thing. Oh, the media is a bit biased, this way. It's first off, they're not the media. It's just regime propaganda, wall to wall. Same way if you went to, like, I don't know, North Korea or China or something like that, that every time you turn on the TV, pick up a newspaper. Western liberals are very good when they go to some sort of authoritarian or global South country at being like, look at this propaganda everywhere. But when I go home and I open the newspaper and I go on social media, and I go to a bookshop, and these ironies of Western liberals are hilarious. They don't understand that, like, well, you are also surrounded by this matrix, effectively, of wall to wall state propaganda. It's just a little bit more sophisticated, maybe, than like um it's barely is. I'll give you an anecdote, right? I was in a third world African country a while back, and it was like this was like this kind of like awkward sort of like tin pot country propaganda. It was the president at the time, so he controlled everything. Every shop you went into had a portrait of him on the wall. I'm talking like a little rinky-dink shop down an alley somewhere. You'd go in and there was a portrait, like not a portrait, but a picture in a frame on the wall. Like you'd have, Jesus or something in Ireland in a old Irish college, just on the wall. And obviously, me being, sentient, I noticed that, like, oh, okay, I get the idea here. And then at one point, I find a newspaper, and it was very good because it said that it was criticizing him, right? But it said that let's call the president is called President John, let's say, right? They go, President John is cracking down on corruption too much. And then I went into the subheading and it said that he's cracking down on corruption so hard, sort of, he's gonna kick the hornet's nest too hard, and he's going to attract hard opposition or put himself in danger almost. And so it was like President John cracking down too hard on corruption. I thought that was kind of funny. It was like slightly sophisticated, I suppose. It's kind of, but also silly. But it's like, yeah, that's basically blunt propaganda, one layer diffused. Like it's slightly brought up a little bit, where it's like, here we are criticizing him. It's like that in the West, but it's about 5 stages more complicated, sophisticated. And that's what all of this is. That's what all of this is. And their main impetus is to keep immigration flowing 90, because the entire economy and system depends on it. And not the economy for us, the economy for like construction firms and the people who are fucking us up. But that's what all this is. When you look at that, all those, like, 7 or 8 headlines I read out to you in just a couple of weeks regarding the elections and the far right, that's not just a bit of media bias. That's on the level of President John. That's on the level of the portrait on the wall. Like that is nakedly rigged. That there's no getting away from that. So that's just another thing. So basically, so far we have the political parties themselves don't listen to their electorates, even to their own detriment. That's weird. The media being what it is weird. And now we get to the next stuff. So I had some tabs here with maps of local election candidates and stuff like that. What's the point of me talking about that? If you don't know who your candidate is, you need to, like, wise up a bit, right? But let's get into an article here. I'll skip that as well, actually. I have to be very sparing about what I get into, because picking any tab is going to come at a cost here, bandwidth-wise, for me. So there was an article about new Irish candidates, so-called foreigners. And I could be wrong on the count. You get differing numbers here. But it said that there were 88 new Irish running, right? Foreigners. Sorry, I shouldn't use the euphemism. Foreigners. 88 foreigners running, which is a big increase from, like, years ago. And then I counted up the nationalist candidates, and I counted 87. Now, it depends on how that is defined, because I also saw a number of 100 floated out there. But it goes to show you that, they're running these foreigner candidates who will work nakedly in the interest of their ethnic group. And we have about the same number of people running who are nakedly running in the interests of their ethnic group, which happens to be the country's majority and historical group. But again, this, and I'm getting into the idea of plantation rigging and stuff like this. That's kind of the biggest thing. The other two things I mentioned are what they are. But this is sort of a more emerging and new and sly phenomenon. A lot of these candidates are propped up. It's not just Mary Sue Magumby or whatever decided to run herself or whatever. A lot of this is backed up by the state and promoted by the state and by the media I've just mentioned. They'll get glowing write-ups and the rest of it. So as we're trying to form this nationalist movement to push back against this very unpopular policy, they're able to field the very immigrants that are being brought in. They're able to field them as a counterweight, basically, right? And then back it up with the plantation numbers. So if you look at it like that, you go, okay, well, as nationalism ascends, which we should, and we should try and all that. But it's like, well, if they're able to take a town, let's just take a town like Fermoy. We'll go back to Derek as our star example tonight, right? Derek runs in Fermoy. Either he gets elected tomorrow or doesn't, but he runs in Fermoy, and basically he's got a couple of thousand potential or actual voters, or whatever the number is, like enough people to get him in, or close to get him in. And what's the word? They are sort of, they would lean towards that side of things. And then next election, he's able to get another 500, another 1,000, whatever, another proportion of people again into that. Well, if the government are able to, in that period of time, import a couple of thousand foreigners, put them in effectively military barracks style grid accommodation, then the day they arrive, hand them the right to vote, lobby them through NGOs and the rest of it, and tell them that, well, you want to vote either for your own ethnic candidate, who can also run, or for an Irish candidate who's kissing ass for your interests, right? They are fielding your vote or looking for your vote, and by just coming to you and saying, I will increase your payment, we will never deport you, we'll hand you a passport, we'll give you star status in the country, the rest of it. If they're able to just import thousands of those people into a town, then how legitimate is this whole thing? It's like, it's great you run the nationalist candidate. It's wonderful that you're running up the numbers in support of them from the Irish community. But if they're able to say, okay, so this candidate has got a bunch of support from the Irish community in this town, well, let's just import twice that number of other communities and then appeal to their basic interests, right? Which are obviously very different to someone who wants to kick them out and disenfranchise them and send them back to their own country and the rest of it. It's sort of totally zero sum at that point. And so long as the government has that power, the regime has that power, whoever happens to be in government, so as long as the power structure has that power, then it sort of casts a bit of a cloud over the whole farce to begin with, doesn't it? I'm reiterating a lot of stuff I mentioned in the last few weeks in my streams. This is kind of a roundup, so you'll hear me repeat a few things here. But Listrin Varna, over the course of 5 to 10 years maximum, went from, largely local Irish people, I don't know what the percent is, but high 80s, 90s, probably somewhere there, right? They went from there to being a third of their own local population and the second biggest individual group after Ukrainians in the space of 5 odd years. How is a nationalist there meant to win an election? No matter how much he appeals to any Irish person, if he gets every last Irish person in that town, every last person, to vote for him or her, he can't win an election. And the people who were voting against him were brought in there, not just randomly, random immigrants come here and there. They were systematically brought in snake lines of coaches under police protection into industrial style living quarters. I mean, how can you say that democracy, that system of representation and legitimacy of the thing that legitimizes the ruling authority of government, how can anybody say that that's legitimate and stand over it? It's not. It's nakedly. You might as well be in a prison, basically, where it's like, I'm a prisoner, you're a prison guard, you have the keys, you have the baton, I'm in the cage. There's more of you than there is of me, or you have guns, I don't. It's like, it's as basic a sort of a, at that point, that's what it gets down to. It's like that's all that's left there, is there? Really? Like, once you take away even the idea or the potential of being able to hypothetically field a candidate that could win and advance your interests. That's a very, very serious thing. Same with Killarney. Killarney's got something like 12 odd thousand people. There's 3,000 Ukrainians. There are probably a bunch of other foreigners too who would have the same interests as those Ukrainians. There's now a Ukrainian candidate running tomorrow. I assume every eligible voter of Ukrainian will be out, probably or likely brought in state-funded buses or buses organized within their community. And if they, ultimately, even if they pay for the buses themselves, it's state-funded because they're state-funded as a block. And so coaches then will arrive down. And instead of it where it's with average Irish people, it was a case of you either register because you have the agency to get up and decide to do it, or you don't because you're lazy and you forgot and the rest of it. That might be the case for you. But of course, your living quarters where you live, you didn't have some NGO representative come with all the details, arranging transport, and physically talking you through on the spot with the phone or the desktop or whatever. It's being like, here's how you go through the website with the translator, and like getting the person straight up voted, like physically in presence with them, getting them registered up. Nobody did that to all of us. Nobody did that to me. So think of the asymmetry there, like the systematized asymmetry there is unfathomably corrupt. And in a sense, we sort of became aware of this a few weeks ago. I think people have been aware of this a while, but it's only through the crucible of this election happening that any of us really saw it for what it was. And it might have been through years ago, but of course there weren't industrial plantations brought into towns so much at that point, so it wasn't all that relevant. It's heck of relevant now, obviously, right? So with the likes of Lisdoonvarna and Killarney and the rest of them. So it's almost like we're reeling around. I feel like, as someone who does this a lot, videos and all that, I'm sort of thinking, I don't think we even had a chance to drive this message home enough. Like, I want to be, whatever happens tomorrow, it certainly will be a core part of what I talk about. You know, there's certain things you'll hear me talk about all the time: the regime, the plantation, the this, the that. There are like little narratives that I go back to because they're so black and white, they're so crucial, they're so integral to how it works. It's such a point blank criticism for me to make. So it's almost mantra like. That will be one of those for me, big time. Maybe the chief one, because it's so important. It's like, yeah, we have this ascendant populist political thing happening, and yet it sort of cowers in the shadow of this grander situation we now have, or have become aware of, that the government can bring in infinite foreigners, they can lobby them through powerful state-funded groups and approach them and groom them and the rest of it, and set them up as a block vote. And there'll be corruption involved in that behind the scenes too. This kind of Tammany Hall voting corruption. People used to, in American politics in 2016, they used to say, oh, you know, if so-and-so more immigrants come into Texas, Texas goes blue and stuff. You know, that idea, if you bring in immigrants, they'll vote in immigrant interests and they'll flip a state and you will never be able to vote a Republican into that state again, no matter what you do, because it's a census count. That people used to talk about that, like, oh, every year so many immigrants come in, but it's another world when you say no. In a town like Dundrum and Tipperary, or Lisdoonvarna and Clare, or Killarney and Kerry, you can have a small an electoral area that is flipped to doomed electorally, literally overnight. It's not a figure of speech. Overnight, a town of 1,000 people, you bring in, or no, a town of 400 people or some area, and you bring in 1,500 migrants either in one sweep overnight or over a couple of occasions. You know, that's way different than the mass democracy thing, like mass national numbers versus immigrants and demography over time and stuff. It's another world to that. And like I say, I don't know if we've sort of, I don't think we got a chance to sort of get to the public, because we made NGOs. People understand that now a bit. People understand the asylum centers and the rest of it now. I don't think that crossed the Rubicon, or not the Rubicon, but the threshold of like online niche conversation to mass public awareness. I don't think we got a chance for that to happen this time. And so going forward, That is a huge thing. I'll just talk a little bit more about it, and let's get straight into Owen Linen's article. So I don't know who I'm pissing off here, either Gript, John McGurk, whoever else runs Gript, or Owen Linen himself, but I am going to read this article flagrantly, and if one of them has an issue with it, either legal or personal, I'll clip this out and delete it or something like that, right? It's been up for a while now. I think everybody has had a read of it. I'm not robbing the article, but I am bringing attention to it. So I think this is a good thing. I'm not stealing. I'm promoting. And I won't read the entirety of it. I'll read about half of it. He goes into it very, very well, and allow me to just read into it, because basically he's got this. He's summed it all up very nicely. So where do I start? So asylum seekers, anyone resident in Ireland, regardless of how recently they arrived in Ireland, can vote in local elections. Not only can up to 50,000 Ukrainian refugees, for example, vote in local elections this week, but because of poor government resettle policies, it is possible that ethnic voting blocks, were they to vote as a bloc, will be powerful enough to get preferred candidates handily across the line. He speaks about the Clowney case, and Natalia, whatever her name is, the Ukrainian candidate, a refugee who arrived in the town for 2 years, or who has lived in the town for 2 years, sorry, is a favourite for election. In 2019, the quota was 1,500 roughly to get elected. There's currently 2,500 Ukrainian refugees resident, all with the so whatever proportion of them are adults who can vote. You can bet they're registered and they're going to be bussed in to vote, and then any other foreigners too will vote, team up with the Ukrainians, because they share the fact that they're foreigners. They want their dole more than less. They want to not get deported as opposed to get deported, clearly, right? So they're going to vote for whoever they feel like is going to, like, they have one clear, obvious, tribal, personal, imperative interest, and they're going to vote for whoever's going to do that. Clearly, their own Ukrainian candidate will do that because she personally has an interest in that. The other thing too, how weird is this, right? Refuge status is meant to be temporary. The idea is that, like, well, your war, when it's over, you go home. You're not a citizen. You know, I'm being naive here, but intentionally, but that's meant to be the idea. That's the understanding most people have. And so in theory, if there was let's say she gets elected tomorrow, and then in a week's time, Zelensky and Putin meet up, hug it out, and they bring peace to it, and they resolve it entirely. Peace and harmony in Ukraine. Tens of billions, hundreds of billions are flooded into the country to repair the infrastructure. There's a boom, something like that. There's an economic boom. Ukraine is wonderful, right? Sort of very quickly. And so in theory, you should be going to her and being like, well, your refuge is no longer valid. You can go home now. You can thank us on the way out for everything we've done for you. What, she's a councillor of the town now. You're meant to deport the councillor. It's farcical that this is happening, needless to say. But so I'll go on with Owen's piece here because it's great. News that anyone resident in Ireland can vote in local elections might come as a surprise to many citizens. Since 2004, and he gives the background on how it sort of came to be. I'll move on from that. He gets into how it's not just that, see, this is the point. It's not just that is the law and that's ridiculous how we are in this situation. That law plus plantation is just a car crash, right, for us. But then on top of that, it's not just that that's the case. It's that you have this whole state infrastructure of NGOs and political activation to activate and sort of I can't think of the word, I don't know what it is, harvest or whatever, those votes into a sort of a block, literally bust them around the place, activate them. It's like, well, that doesn't happen with Irish people. That's totally unfair. Yeah, a campaign launched this year to boost voter participation among those in direct provision saw Liliana Fernandez, program manager at Common Purpose Ireland, you know that's going to be state funded or whatever, acknowledged that Ireland is one of the very few inclusive countries in regard to how we let them vote. In reality, Ireland's inclusive approach means that, for example, those 85% of asylum seekers who arrived at Dublin Airport in 2023 with no or fake ID can vote in upcoming local elections should they have registered in time and choose to do so. So if you showed up and you said no English and says, who are you? You go, I don't know who I am. Where's your passport? I lost it. It was stolen by my persecutors back in wherever, or I lost it on the plane or something like that, right? You basically, and that alone is like, I know it's a cliche at this point in this or these circles, but the fact that that's happening shows that again is another element. How can that be happening? Think of your average Chinese or Indian person, if in India or China, if you said that to them, they'd be like, "What?" Like, we're, and you say, "Oh, what about your digital ID and your, super state surveillance and all this? Aren't you very like subjugated by your state?" They'd say, "Wait, no, hold on a second. You're saying that random foreigners who could be total criminals in mass numbers or whatever can show up to your airport, and your government lets them do that? That can't be ineptitude. What is going on in your country, and how are you so defeated that you all just have to look on in bemusement or dismay at that happening?" And that's how it is. It's like, okay, so a guy can arrive and just say, "I arrived on the plane with a passport, but what I'm telling you now is that I don't have it." And instead of being bundled into a cell or a dungeon or like catapulted across the ocean again, they're told, "All right," and then they say the word asylum, and they're brought to a hotel to live in indefinitely, um, with a view to becoming a total citizen and living as a state dependent, with tons of advocacy from that state against the local people. Like, how bizarre that is. But then beyond that, as Owen says here, then that same person, a few weeks later, or just immediately, once they land in, I don't know, Newtown, Mount Kennedy, they now can vote. And not just that, they can run for the local election to become the leader, sort of, in a sense, of that town. And they could potentially have hundreds of their own people to vote them in there as a formality. What? Like, I don't know what to say to that. But anyway, so that's the situation. Yeah, so puts that out. Then the 2004 change to eligibility has been quietly put to use for 2 decades by the Immigrant Council of Ireland, whose undertaking seemed to have the potential to shape the future of the country by training immigrant activist leaders to become local representatives and by mobilising immigrant voter blocks to register. The Immigrant Council of Ireland seems to be the engine room of immigrant representation in local elections. In a recent ex post, they celebrated registering 3,000 people in immigrant communities to vote. Polish activist Teresa Bukowska voted about personally signing up 200 new voters in the weeks before. That the Immigrant Council and staff are involved in aggressive voter registration campaigns isn't too surprising. What should raise eyebrows, however, is their outsized role in placing new immigrant candidates in local election races. This June, more than 100 candidates of migrant background will be running in local elections. The 50% increase has been in part driven by the Immigrant Council celebrating right, la la la. I don't want to read words, so where do I go? So then he talks about how ethnic block voting works. I think he gets substance. Returning to Ireland. There it is. So returning to Ireland, the Immigrant Council run 2 political training programs which act as springboards to political leadership for immigrants in Ireland. The Leadership Academy brings together migrants and refugees living in Ireland who are committed to social justice, equality, blah, blah, blah. The academy teaches the fundamentals of activism and community organizing. So there's this whole grooming process going on where it's like, well, where's the grooming process for just normal Irish people, right? And don't talk to me about Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. They're as traitorous as anyone else. They're voting for foreigners as they are. Like, that's what they exist for. But in terms of, like, I'll be naive again. What about an Irish? So a foreigner will vote in the interests of foreign interests, their own interest. Like, if you were taking democracy from a naive, neutral perspective, you'd say, well, in that case, why don't the government put down loads of money in 20 different organizations and all this is funded and supported for someone like me or you? We say, well, we have a different interest. We have 70% of the electorate or whatever it is actually agree with what we're saying, and there's no representation in it at all. So if you're talking about increasing representation among marginalized groups and all that, then where's our money? And if you're able to plant the country infinitely, and then you're able to groom all these people systematically with our money in taxes against us, and then you're telling us that we're meant to run against 50 different scare headlines and the rest of it, and the same NGOs, by the way, who are lobbying and grooming those migrants, they spend the other half of their time demonizing and trying to undermine, dox, destroy, analyze, and box away everything we're doing. So it's like it's a complete like matrix against like the any nationalist candidate in Ireland. And by virtue of that, it's a matrix against any potential nationalist voter, someone who votes against mass immigration. Because if you're attacking candidates, you're attacking the politics, you're attacking the potential voter, you're attacking that very potentiality of the idea. So it's like, again, I'm just coming back to the point of like nationalism plus the democratic. We're not just trying to reach the voters and get elected or whatever. It's like we have to totally, and nobody's going to listen to me talk for hours. You will, and some people will. But in terms of, like Owen has done here and others, this has to sort of filter out into understandable, bite-size, repeated things to try and get our arm and come up with new phrases and all that, memes, the rest of it, to try and like get everybody to understand this. Like this is so rigged, it's almost meaningless, in a sense. But do go out and vote tomorrow now. Don't let me demoralize you. Because if we like, my point is, if we have any chance of like running in this rigged system and still winning in it, it's in the nearer term rather than the long term. Think how rigged to be in 10 years. What an Irish town is like 5% of its own town, and all the immigrants are totally rigged up by NGOs and the rest of it. You know, at that point, it's gone. So it's like it almost increases the imperative of trying to use this rigged system now. So I mean, there might be more from Owen Linehan here. So among the modules in the program are community organizing and building power, 2 units on speaking to power, a unit on leadership and dealing with resistance, and another one, political mobilization. One graduate of this program, blah, blah, blah. No offense, but just it's not what I'm looking for. A key stated goal of the program is to connect immigrant leaders under a social justice oriented training agenda in their future activist and political careers. The program was funded by the EU Migration, Asylum and Integrations Fund of 9.88 billion endowment. Come on. The Immigrant Council runs a second program that highlights the relationship between progressive NGO sector and the government. Then there's another one. The Migrant TD Internship Program aims to promote migrant participation in Irish politics through political internships, blah, blah, blah. So you get the idea there. The program is fully funded by the Department of Housing, Government and Heritage. It is the successor of the council's migrant councillor scheme. So this is, you get the idea, just scheme after scheme. The council played a contributing role into the government's recent task force on safe participation in political life. This is just total North Korea stuff. Like, I mean, like, you know, then they'll turn around and say, "Oh, we all have a fair chance. Voice your opinion. Elect a candidate under these circumstances." Go on. So finishing up, the Immigrant Council of Ireland then is directly responsible for providing politically progressive social and activist leadership training to 1/4 of all immigrant candidates running in local elections. They've established a large immigrant voter registration machine to support these candidates. They are up to 80% funded by the EU and the Irish government and are working in collaboration with the Irish government to fundamentally change the Irish democratic model by pushing mentorship programs and legislation that institutionalizes priority for migrant political candidates. But this is the bit that I mentioned a while ago, but this is key. He says there has been no national debate on whether non-citizens should, in fact, have the right to vote in local elections, and no examination to what the consequences might be for a political system. That must change. Yeah, you know, people need to know about this. Like, go out on the street and talk to people. A lot of them will have no idea. So it's just and again, if let's say we have the existing amount of migrants in Ireland, and you totally shut the door. So that means we still have like a million plus, between 1 and 2 million immigrants, whatever. And then we have plantation centers, hundreds of thousands of people around the country or whatever it is. That'd already be very bad. Like, even if you stopped all migration now, just the fact that you have this column within the country who are being approached by the government in this way, like the quality of it would be bad. But when you combine the fact that, well, yeah, that's the problem right now, but next week there'll be another several hundred, God knows how many. I mean, that's asylum seekers. If you count work visas and all the other types of people, it's probably thousands. I'm going to be loose on the numbers here, but like, and next week it'll be thousands more, and the following week it'll be thousands more, and like this time next year it'll be another 180,000 people or whatever. You know, that's insane. That like, it's basically like the quality of it, the systematic quality of the NGOs and all that, and how it's all groomed is bad. But then you combine that with the mass numbers of people. It's basically human waves of people. You know, that's not democracy. That like under no, there's no way that you can describe that as democracy. It's like if you had, I don't know, what's an equivalent. Let's say Haiti and Dominican Republic, right? Dominican Republic is famously touchy about their border with Haiti. I mean, you can probably understand why. They have a very strong border, and it's strongly policed by the state. It's kind of Hispanic-y, whatever it is, Latin American community there. And then it's like blacks on the other side, Africans, basically. And so there's this nativism from right to left, let's say east to west, on that island. And that defines the sort of neighbor relationship between those two countries. And what you have is Haitians constantly trying to get through that border, get over, get in there in some way. And then on the other, it'll be heavily policed, but even people in Dominican Republic, I'd say they don't take shit. They would probably grab someone randomly. So it'll be like an informal border protection happens too. But again, it's a very tough border, let's say, and very allergic from Dominican Republic to Haiti. So it's almost like a geopolitical border, you know what I mean, between those two, very heightened. It'd be like if you took, you know, a town in Dominican Republic and with, you know, 1,000 Dominicans, and you said, okay, you all can vote for whatever you want to vote for, you know, let the chips fall where they may, left, right, you know, whatever, right? And you can vote. Some of you might be in favor of immigration, maybe a minority. A lot of you are against it. You know, you vote for your government. You vote for your candidate. That's how it works. Pretty straightforward. Bit of corruption involved, but it's still legitimate, you know. And then you say, now immigration being the key issue among you, Dominicans, now we're going to actually helicopter in 2,000 Haitians overnight, tell them they can all vote, and let's hold the vote. You're effectively dissolving Dominican Republic at that point, right? You're effectively, and you scale that up. You do it, it happens in cities, local suburbs, areas. Like I mentioned that one town example, but scale that up to all the towns, right? As you scale that up, very quickly you get to a point where you go, there goes my pen. You're effectively, like, it's not just a bit of migrant corruption or a bit of immigration. It's like you are openly, radically dissolving the entire nation state sort of before people's eyes overnight. And it's not just through the numbers of people you're bringing in, it's through the enfranchisement you're offering them straight away. And if the enfranchisement wasn't good enough, you are sort of hand-holding them up to the ballot box via government programs. I mean, this is like an organized, I always say this, but almost military grade, you know, in a sense, dissolution of the Dominican Republic. And because those two countries are close, because it's not general foreigners, but it's specifically the Haitians, it would be almost easier to understand. You'd be like, clearly there is some sort of fifth column Haitian or maybe some geopolitical enemy who has somehow sort of taken control of without anyone noticing, taken control of Dominican Republic and is consciously, knowingly, without declaring it publicly, officially, but they clearly are. You don't have to be a conspiracy. They're clearly dissolving the state. Or take it like, let's say Zelensky, let's say Russia doesn't win in Ukraine overnight, but they make big advances, and next thing there's kind of a coup, and basically all the the American. I'm trying to get you thinking about this, right? It more like in other ways. Ukraine basically gets the American power there gets kind of driven out, right? Gradually. It doesn't happen overnight, but they do get driven out. Any of the spies, the saboteurs, the military hardware, all that kind of gets shoved out all the way back to like Germany or something. So they're out. like basically Russian hegemony gradually sort of it creeps over Ukraine, like deep into Ukrainian government, and suddenly Zelensky falls out a window, and a lot of the others do too. And next thing you see that it starts with like a moderate person who says we don't need to be Western puppets. We need to be reasonable here and have talks with both sides. Get back to basics and be a buffer state and bring peace to the country. Stop the death. We're not pro-Russian, but we want to stop the death. Let's end the war and come to peace terms, reasonable ones. But then gradually the Russian language imperative gets stronger and stronger, and the rest of it, and it basically grows to where actually within about 5 years, anyone who's looking on, maybe not Ukrainians, because their newspapers now are starting to look like a hardcore pro-Russia view, right? And so Ukrainians might not even get it so much. But if you were a neutral outside observer, you'd be like, oh, they've been totally colonized up, like at all levels, by Russia. Clearly, it's not just that they lost the war; it's worse. It wasn't even declared. It's just that they have become a Russian vassal through the media, through control, assassinations, in putting people into government. It's now becoming a Russian thing. And then again, they start holding elections. And next thing, the Ukrainians in a town, and this would be at scale, but a town of 1,000 Ukrainians, next thing a helicopter or a big load of buses or whatever it is, plane arrives in. And next thing, the town has got 2,000 Russians literally brought in overnight against 1,000 Ukrainian population. And then they say, time to vote. Let's have an election. And by the way, all these Russians who just arrived literally 2 days ago, they can all vote. So, and we're going to bust them in. We're going to hold their hand if they didn't already know, which they do. But we're going to, so there's no confusion, we're going to hold their hand right up to the ballot box, make sure they all go, this new Russian community. And you're going to hold the elections on whether Ukraine should join the whatever it's called, the Russian, what you might know in the chat, the Russian version of NATO, right? The CSTO or something. Is Ukraine going to formally join that? And then they bring another 1,000 Russians in the next time, and of course that's a foregone conclusion. Then they bring another 1,000 Russians in, and another few. So it's like mass majority Russian towns and cities now all over Ukraine. It's not just Eastern Ukraine, the Russian majority. It's been totally planted up with Russians right up to the Polish border. And now they're holding elections, and the next election then is like almost more towards Belarus, which is like, are we on the brink of just kind of what's the word? I can't think of the word. Whatever the opposite to secession is. Sorry, I'm running out of vocabulary here, but basically we're going to be integrated into Russia. We're just going to become Russia. Like, we're going to start flying the Russian flag. We're Russia now. This is Russia. I mean, if that happened, so I'm just trying to emphasize how, even if you're a person who agrees with me all the time, is that even I, and so perhaps you as well, sometimes get lost in the chaos of it, where you're like, it's a culture war, it's a corrupt government, oh, migrant, oh, plantation, oh, regime, all this kind of stuff. You talk yourself around it all the time, and you sort of forget that sort of Haitian Dominican example, or even the Russia-Ukraine one is even better. You'd look at it and you'd go, that is a military grade. That is a complete I'm looking annexed. Thank you. That's the word. That is an annex. It's a perfect one. I'm glad that it works so well for us, right? Is that it is an active military grade annexation of a nation state. Like, and someone could say, oh, well, in that Ukrainian example, they all voted. They all went to the ballot box. They all got a vote. This is a thriving democracy or whatever. You'd go, all these NATO people would look at that clearly and say, that's not there may be a theoretical democracy. People cast a vote, but clearly that is almost like a military occupation, just done via sort of this taking over of a ballot box situation by literally. And if you told some pro-Western, like EU person, that that's how Russia would do it, they'd almost say that's a bit on the nose, isn't it? I mean, that's a bit cartoonish. Like, I'm totally anti-Russia and I think they're devious and all that, they might say, but they'd be like, that's a bit that'd be a bit on the nose and a bit obvious. I think they'd be a bit more sophisticated than that. I don't think they would just arrive with 8 buses full of Russian men into a small town overnight. Surely they'd make it a bit more gradual or a little bit more sophisticated than that. Like, have it that it's not obvious. It kind of gradually bleeds in or something like that. If they brought in 10 busloads of people overnight to a small town and then said, let's hold an election, um, it'd be like, they'd be like, that's too military grade. That makes the little green men in Donetsk or sorry, in Crimea, that makes the little green men in Crimea situation almost look a bit delicate, to be honest, if we're being real. It literally does. Because when the little green men went into Crimea, well, at least everyone there was Russian identifying anyway. So I'm sort of flabbergasting myself here as I think through the analogy. It would actually make the little green men thing look sort of more harmless and legitimate. And that's what's happening in Ireland. Like, that's what's happening. Our nation state is in the most nakedly corrupt, demographic sort of bust-in takeover thing in front of us. And if I'm flabbergasting myself thinking about the scale of this problem, I'm figuring this out as I talk to you, right? These analogies. But if that's only occurring to me and perhaps you, then where's Seamus Normie at? I mean, they have no idea. So they're basically having the people bust in and they're sitting there going, geez, that's a disgrace. A lot of these people aren't legitimate. I like the legitimate ones, but I mean, so long as they're legitimate and so long as they have the passport checked, and but I don't think we have the resources and stuff. It's like, okay, that's good. I mean, they're on pushing in the right direction. But when you compare it to like a military grade annexation, which is kind of, I don't think I'm exaggerating the stakes there really. When you compare it to that, fumbling around over passports or, I don't mind some of them, but some, like, that's deer in the headlights compared to what's really going on. And when you take something like Newtown Mount Kennedy and you look at the fortress there, it's military grade. I mean, it's almost too conspiratorial for me. Like, that's the reality, but it's almost, I want it to be a little bit more, I want to be like painting a picture and saying, like the people who come out and say, there's an EU army, they have a blue helmet in their suitcase, and when someone clicks their fingers, they're going to be activated as the UN army and round us all up and put us in FEMA camps. I always say to that like, yeah, it's in effect, it's kind of true. The spirit of what you're saying is true, but it's cartoonish. It's too much. You know what I mean? I don't think anyone can come and buy into that. Even though the spirit of what you're saying is kind of true, it functionally like almost like an occupying military. But when you actually start thinking about it, you go, well, it is like a Russia annexing Ukraine via, like, airlifting people into a town and being like, let's hold again, as a foreign observer of a tin pot country or one tin pot country annexing its small neighbor or something like that. In the context of that, you would look at it and say, oh, that's an active annexation. I mean, these people are being defeated in under sort of wartime level circumstances. And it's just, instead of it being like the gun battle has been won. And now they're just doing this kind of farcical colonial show, rather than just point guns at everyone. They'll be like, no, let's get all the, what's the example? It's like, let's get all the Vietnamese people, I don't know, something like Vietnam and Cambodia or whatever, it's if there was some like war between them, which there was briefly. We're just going to literally flood the country with like lines of military vehicles and buses, flood them in, and then hold the election and to take over and call Vietnam or call Cambodia. Now the referendum will be, will Cambodia join the Vietnamese Union, effectively become Vietnam territory? And we're going to hold a referendum, but hold up 2 seconds, give us 3 weeks, and we're going to bring in 7 million Vietnamese strategically to be the majority everywhere, gerrymandering effectively, but on a military scale. Yeah, we're going to do that, and then we're going to hold that. You'd almost be kind of going, why don't they just kind of roll in with tanks and sort of put guns in everyone's faces and say, "You're Vietnam now"? Like, wouldn't that almost be just more to the point? Just like, why hold this farce? But you would say, "Oh well, I suppose it's a thin veil of legitimacy or something like that." I don't know. And anybody who complains about it, they'll suppress them, demonize them. They'll use media. They'll use their control of the levers of state and propaganda, and like fire people from jobs who state the obvious, and they create an atmosphere of terror among the people, and then they do it, and then rewrite the history afterwards a little bit, and all that. Oh well, it was just a peace and harmony. Um, it was a peace and harmony was found between these two great peoples, and then we joined this greater Vietnamese bloc. Like, you'd be looking at it going, this is farcical tin pot military takeover. Uh, I don't know. I don't want to belabor the point. I think I've said it, right? But it is shocking, and that's what's going on. So again, about the election tomorrow, go back to my original points. We are ascendant within the Irish political community, within the Irish community, within the Irish population of this country. We are ascendant, and either tomorrow or next time, plus the time after, whatever, we are going to become mainstream candidates and the rest in Ireland. But the caveat is among Irish people. And then that's the problem, right? Is that you go, well, yeah, it'd be one thing if you said, oh, that's a problem because by 2072, Irish people will technically become a minority. Well, yeah. Okay, so it's like the idea of Texas going blue over time. But no, it's way worse than that if you're talking about thousands of people into towns by bus under police escort. At this point, it's more like military with the beefed up guards and the helicopters flying over and stuff. It's like the analogy I'm making. I want it to be that the analogy I'm making is a sort of a painting an exaggerated picture. So when I said earlier, I was sort of exaggerating to say they helicopter Russians into Ukraine or they helicopter Haitians into Dominican Republican villages. And I thought, yeah, I want to exaggerate it for the effect. Like I actually intentionally want it to be more than the reality, just to paint a picture. But then I come back to Ballyogan and Newtown, Mount Kennedy, and I go, well, no, there have been multiple occasions where there's police helicopters flying overhead. There are legions of guards in soldier Robocop uniforms marching forward. It's like, shit. It's my exaggeration for effect breaks down. It's just it's one for one. It's the same thing. I can't exaggerate it. This is mad. I'm blowing my own mind here. So that's Owen Linehan's article there. Yeah, then there was it gets boring now after all that, but like ministers allocating 230 grand to political parties to increase female participation and diversity. Listen to this phrase they used here. At some point, they used the phrase "people of diversity." Yeah, so donating that or putting that money out to increase the number of women candidates and people of diversity. So that means not Irish. So again, yeah, the Orwellian sort of tin pot dictatorship, totalitarian colonial regime language, kind of very crass. But yeah, and it went to a bunch of parties, including AN2. Just bear that in mind. So basically, they're paid to run foreign candidates. So I mean, that's just one. That's a sliver of everything else I've mentioned in terms of like how it's rigged. What else did I put up here? The rest is whatever. It is whatever. I'm just going to leave it at that. Yeah. So that's what we're looking at, lads. But do go. I'll be out tomorrow to vote. I hope we get our candidates. I mean, it's not a reason why the whole thing is a farce and to stay at home. It's a reason to, at least while there's some chance, to get some candidates in, because we have to sort of, like, at least if you get a candidate in and you can get the candidate talking about this is military grade annexation of our country, which we've spent 1,000 years fighting to exist. And now, like, this is like the last great struggle here. Like, it's almost, this is at a scale that exceeds anything before. Perhaps not in open violence in terms of Cromwell or something like that, but in terms of scale and rapid speed and how organized it is and how sophisticated it is. But think about back in the day with the Ulster plantations, they had to get people on, I don't know, wooden boats, and when they had to post letters back and forth about local rebellions and stuff. I mean, how did that I'm trying to think of the historical time period, but I mean that had to go via like a lad on a horse with a letter in his pouch or whatever, then onto a ship, and then over. So like, you know, how sophisticated could it be? Whereas now we have the whole technological infrastructure of everything, a phone in everyone's pocket, the rest of it, infrared, this, that, and the other. Like, you name it, they have it. And they're able to ship, thousands of people in like that. Whereas think about back in the day, getting a few Ulster Scots into Northern, it was logistically slower and harder to do. So this is the greatest peril the Irish nation has ever faced. And I wish that were a dramatic exaggeration, but it's absolutely not. Dwarfs anything else. I would say in terms of scale and sophistication. But so that's kind of that. Good night. I'll do super chats here. I'll see if I'm missing anything. Yeah. No, I'll do super chats. And I know people often donate with PayPal and buy me a coffee. I had a recent email from Stripe again. They're trying to like do the whole thing of like, oh, there's a box. Actually, we've decided, even though it was grand up until now, we've decided there's a box here you filled in a way we didn't like. We have to just redo that. And then you go on the website and you do it. And then you get the same email a week later. YouTube did that too. It's like, it's annoying. So that may or may not be available, but whatever. Anyway, just kind of giving you some office admin here, inside sort of track stuff. But sorry, I'm boring you by that. So I'm interested to read these now because I'm sick of talking, as in I'm sick of monologuing. Freaky gives £2 and says, "Keep it real, everyone. Love and peace to you all." All pounds. This is the British. This is GB News pulling the strings now of the Irish far right, isn't it? Oh no. Yeah, we will keep it real. Love and peace. Love and peace. Didn't Ringo Starr say that? I think it was. But yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate that. Hope you enjoyed the show. Grania €5, thank you, says, how many miraculous medals going in the ballot box tomorrow? Give them hell in the votes, folks. Aaron Gabra. I love that. I love that. I'm kind of in terms of belief and faith and all that. I'm tortured. I'm one of those types about the whole thing. It's not that I don't believe or have faith or any of that, but I'm a tortured cynic, modern sinner or whatever, right? And I also feel like it's almost scary to believe in a way, because if you choose to have genuine, sincere faith, you are committed to holding yourself clearly to a much higher standard. Like if you fully say, it's not just that I believe in God and I have faith in God and all that, but that I really, 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 really believe it. And to some extent, I know this is more than you bargained for your super chat, but there's an extent to which, like, if you really choose to buy in altogether and say, I'm going to surrender myself to faith in God truly, not like in a fundamentalist or kind of obscure way, but just, where you, instead of saying, oh yeah, I kind of believe in it and forget about it and move on with your life kind of thing, background stuff. If you go, no, I really am like a devout and committed believer in God, right? Think of the pressure in a sense that's on you it's like the average, and I'm not just talking about myself or something, but I think a lot of people are scared about the idea, because it puts the burden of goodness or something on you, and not just like good in front of someone, but good in the deepest sense in your daily life, in everything you do, in how you think, the whole lot. So it's like the most radical proposition in a way, and scary. And when I think of people who believe enough, even though it's just a physical item or whatever, but someone who believes enough to put the medals in, that they don't put the medals in and think, what am I doing? I'm just putting something in a box. But they actually believe that will matter. Whether you do or don't believe that as a watcher. But like the fact that someone does believe that in their heart, because think about it, I've thought about this before, the miraculous medals in the ballot box thing. I've thought deeply about this in the past. That's why I'm going off. You've just it reminded me of it. You're putting it in, and the whole idea is that no one sees. So you're not doing it performatively. You're not the person who sees it when they open the box. They don't know it was you did it. It is a totally private, committed, faithful act. And so when I think about someone putting the medal in the box, I think, oh yeah, that person believes totally, in the private reality of themselves to God and all that. And that kind of faith is inspiring, basically. It's a true private act of prayer and faith. That's how I feel about it. And it reminds me of it all. So thank you for the super chat. Next one is Richard RMWD. Says, I'm the only nationalist running in Pilltown, Kilkenny. Some heartbreaking stories at the doors. Okay, I don't know all candidates, and I don't have your surname clearly there, but I believe you. I know there's a candidate in Pilltown, so that must be you. Yeah, the heartbreaking stories at the door thing. I always think about that, how there's so much trouble in the country economically. People who are economically depressed, like poor, basically poor as fuck, and they're 60 years old and their two kids are off. One of them's, driven demented by modernity, like an alcoholic or druggie or something like that. They don't speak to them anymore. They can't. And then the other one's doing okay, but they're in Australia. They're rarely back, and they're trying to keep the heating going, and the car, they have to get rid of the car. But they don't tell anyone, because they're proud. They don't go to people and, like, they're isolated. And then they walk around Tesco's, and that weird, like, if you're out in public these days, everyone is so zonked a bit, stressed. I've spoken about this before. But, you're walking around Tesco's and you're passing people all the time, let's say. Maybe you're retired and a little bit lonely, or you could be this could be any demographic, but you're troubled, you're poor, you're isolated, and the whole system is disintegrated. You don't have necessarily a good, strong community, nation, religious group, Kaylee down the road every 2 nights a week or something like that. Even the pub is gone. Everything's kind of gone. And all you have left is just, I don't know, the box in front of you, the house, the cold house, the loneliness, and stuff like that. And it could be a mother trying to raise some kids. There's all sorts of stories. But you think about all these people are under, like, think about the working family who are kicked out of a house that they were renting. The landlord wants it back, and they're in a bind where they can't buy a house and they can't find somewhere to rent, like, definitely that they can afford. They don't have much family, and they're, like, stressed off their hoop because they have 2 young kids or whatever. I have 2 young kids, and there's a period there I wasn't on the margin like that, and I've landed well on my feet. I'm delighted, right, with life. But the experience got me thinking about, I was like, well, if we had a bit less and conditions went more unfortunately, I was in it enough to kind of think, God, yeah, I can see how someone who would have traditionally considered themselves like, oh, middle class, I make a bit of money, and we're okay, and we have savings, and we could pay a decent enough level of rent. Like, there should never be a situation where we're sort of starting to look into being in trouble. I started to look at it going, God, whoa, the margins have gone so crazy that, yeah, were we to have less, and were 2 things to go wrong at once, a few things like that, you could find yourself going, wait, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not totally poor, I'm none of these things. And so you could see how, again, if their margins were less and if things went against them and all that, how they'd be going, holy shit, I have a couple of young kids and I'm actually borderline not going to have anywhere to live. Like, if that's actually happening to you, your world is spinning around all day long, and you're barely sleeping or any of that, right? So you have people, if that's happening, I'm talking about the elderly person, whatever, and they're walking around the supermarket and everyone's a stranger and everyone's got a furrowed brow, and it's a fucking nightmare, And that's not everyone's living in misery, but a lot of people are. And the environment then that they go into, they can't talk to anyone. They're too proud to say it. Everyone is a stranger on the street. Everyone's a stranger, kind of thing. Yeah, and then of course, Ukrainian drives by you in his Porsche Cayenne, and when you get annoyed about it, you're called a racist, or so, and then they outvote you. The system, it's like you combine the whole thing. It's like, it's awful. It's awful. What's happening to people? How dehumanized and decommunitized, or whatever all these words, what's being done. I don't know. Maybe I'm rambling more than what you were bargaining for there, but thanks for the super chat. So Imperator Scrotorum, €6. Thanks as always. Cheers, regular. Puts in a link there in the chat, lads. You can see it yourself. You can click on it. So that link has a full list of nationalist candidates that allows you to check your area for the locals and Europeans. So I'm such a disorganized idiot that I sort of hand wave that away, like, oh, you can find it or whatever. So thank you for actually being diligent enough to do that. You can follow that link and find your candidate and go vote. Absolutely. Roddy Murray Film says nationalism is inevitable. Thanks, Roddy. €2 super chat. Thanks very much. Yeah, it is inevitable. John Mearsheimer, with his real, realist philosophy of politics and nation states and all that, he said, I watched a speech of his one time. He said, nationalism is the most powerful force in the world in a political sense, and it is. Nationalism it's funny. It's like globalism is so powerful, but with all of its weaponry and all of its money and all of that. But even though we have nothing, the power of nationalism, no matter what you do, no matter how many people you ferry in, it'll only inspire backlash. And so nationalism is kind of one of those things that it's like one of those squidgy toys or something, or a balloon or something, where it's like you can squeeze it and it can like to try and get rid of it. But if you squeeze it this way, it'll start popping out all the other ways. You kind of can't, unless you kill everyone or something. Like that's kind of the idea of like how bad genocide is, that you wipe out the entire genetic group of a people. But it's kind of like, unless you do that, nationalism, the power of national ethno-cultural identity and all that among people, it can be suppressed, it can be diminished, it can be put under a black cloud into a gulag and all that. But it can't, I believe anyway, it just can't be, you can't squeeze it into a smaller space, into like a little diamond or whatever. It's like it has to pop out, or it's like trying to squeeze two opposite magnets together or whatever it is, right? You just can't do it. Like, and the more effort you put in will only cause it to pop out another way. Look at even look at Serbia after Milosevic and all that. Like, there's still a big national identity there, no matter how much it was crushed. And think of how many centuries of other, with the Muslim invasions and the rest of it. Think of how many crucibles Serbians have been put through. Think of how many of them have been killed, how many governments have been totally wiped out, turned into this kind of almost NATO subjugate and the rest of it. But you can't get rid of it. You could even demographically depress them and the rest of it, but it'll just lead to a reaction. They will react under the pressure. And that's what all nations will do. So John Mearsheimer's right. Another super chat from Roddy. I'm also a stubborn bastard. Don't change anything. Yeah. I with the setup and all that, there can be issues. Sometimes I'm out of sync. Sometimes things aren't great, but it's almost, I'll try to change little things. If I get a laptop that works better, and if the bookmarks work better, I'll gradually take those things on, sure, one bit at a time. But in general, I get comfortable in what I'm doing, and I like what I'm doing, and I come on every night, and the method is the same, and it works better for me to have them all laid out in front of me than in bookmarks. And I'm just a creature of, like, if I do a good stream where everything works and I work well, I'm on form, I've started to love sitting here doing this. It's one of my sort of favorite things that I do in my life, in a sense. And I like the comfort of it, the familiarity of it. That's almost like a human flaw, where you sort of become attached to the comfort of it being like it is. I love it. I love it as it is. So gradual change will occur, but it will be gradual. So James Anto Ward, €6, thank you very much, and says, it's not that bad, the sound. Okay, thanks. I'm glad it wasn't that bad. I might edit a bit afterwards or something, see what happens. But and then finally, our most loyal soldier, among a few others, Armchair Limerick Nationalist, €5. Once again, thanks very much. says, thanks, Gerard. Hopefully the migrant vote does not null the nationalist vote tomorrow. Highlighting the wrongful impact of this is our only comeback. You've summed up what I was trying to say over the course of 2 hours very well. We'll see. It'll be very interesting to see how the likes of Killarney pans out tomorrow, and how the likes of Derrick and Fermoy and the rest of there's a lot. That's why I'm ready. I didn't actually stream for a few nights, because I was like, I'll just do some of my own life stuff, because I envision there being several nights where I'm almost obliged to come on live over the next like couple of nights. So there will be a lot to digest, and again, even if it's like the plantation thing has way more swing than we thought it did, in a sense, politically, that just makes our message so much stronger among at least Irish people who would ever vote for us. Because then you go to them and you just say, listen, this is it a Manichaean struggle? I don't know. I think that might be a word that's appropriate, or it might be totally wrong. But like, it is actually just a zero-sum, naked, sort of open identity struggle within the democratic space. Like, the idea that you're going to continue being too good for it, or that it's radical. Well, let me show you what's being done on the other side. So I don't think you can keep voting for Johnny whoever. I think you need to get real now. And so, again, if the plantation vote is weak and irrelevant, great. We can proceed with our nationalism, and it actually doesn't have that big an effect. And if it is big, then that boosts the validity of our message among at least potential voters. So, but you said it much more succinctly than I did. But yeah, thanks very much. Appreciate it. I don't know how to get the chats off the screen, because I'd like to say good night without it. Oh, there you go. Got it. We got it. Okay, so yeah, thanks very much, lads. Go to bed. Go vote tomorrow. Go vote. Make sure. Look, if there's someone else in your house and they're going to go vote, just one last pitch to say, listen, just vote for so and so. You know what I mean? Try to lean on people. Try to persuade the people you can, like people who are close enough that you can just say, listen, ma'am, listen, brother, listen, friend, just vote for this guy. Let me give you a quick 30-second pitch. They're registering foreigners who are just off the boat. Like, if you want to do it as quick as that, just tell them that. Say, so you have to vote for this guy, and maybe you'll get a few extra votes. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for watching. Be back probably, I assume, tomorrow night to talk about how things are going. Yeah, so take care. Ihoa. See you.